Donald Trump's worst nightmare didn't come from a courtroom, it came from a comedy stage. On live TV, Jimmy Kimmel and Jim Carrey teamed up in the most unexpected way, exposing secrets, mocking his ego, and sending him into one of the biggest late-night meltdowns of his life. It was one of those nights when television feels electric, Brooklyn lights flashing, a crowd buzzing, and a late-night host ready to swing harder than ever. Jimmy Kimmel walked out from behind the curtain wearing that familiar half-smile, the one that says, "Oh, I've got something good tonight." The audience didn't just cheer, they erupted. They knew what was coming. Kimmel was back on every channel, live from New York's loudest borough, and he was about to make headlines. A few weeks earlier, Donald Trump had gone on one of his trademark rants, accusing Kimmel of having terrible ratings and calling him a talentless nobody. Classic Trump, trying to turn every insult into a victory lap. But tonight, Kimmel had receipts and a microphone. He leaned on his desk, looked right into the camera, and said with that easy, lethal calm, "We're back on every channel." Just 5 words, but they landed like a body slam. The audience howled. The band hit a sting. Trump, wherever he was, probably grabbed his phone, because that single line wasn't just a flex. It was proof that everything he'd said was a lie. Trump had claimed Kimmel was finished, that his career was over, that no one wanted to watch him. But the packed house in Brooklyn said otherwise. Every seat was full, every laugh was loud, and every second of airtime was trending online before Kimmel even finished his first joke. And then came the punch that made history. Kimmel pivoted mid-monologue, his eyes gleaming. "Trump's running mate drama continues," he said, pausing just long enough for the audience to lean in. "But hey, good news. We finally have a name for that kind of fragile masculinity, Vice President Maybelline." Boom! The crowd roared, so loud the floor shook. Phones shot up. That clip was destined to go viral before Kimmel even left the stage. And somewhere, late at night, Trump was scrolling through his phone, stewing. Within hours, his social media account exploded with a message that read simply, "And so it begins." It was nearly midnight. Nobody knew what he meant. Some thought he was threatening revenge. Others guessed he'd just sat down on the toilet again. Either way, it was pure Trump, vague, dramatic, and desperate for attention. But this wasn't just about one joke or one tweet. It was about something bigger. The moment the comedy world and the political circus collided head-on. Because just as Kimmel was dismantling Trump with punchlines, Jim Carrey was loading up on satire from another network entirely. Carrey had been a storm brewing, in plain sight. His impressions on Saturday Night Live, his version of Joe Biden versus Alec Baldwin's Trump, were like watching a cartoonist sketch reality in real time. No props, no effects, just Carrey's face bending like rubber and slicing like a knife. When Carrey's Biden squared off against Baldwin's Trump, it wasn't just parody, it was art. Every twitch, every squint, every calm, "come on, man," carried the quiet rhythm of sanity against chaos. It reminded people that decency could still exist, even in a comedy sketch. That night, late-night television wasn't just funny, it was therapeutic. The audience didn't just laugh, they exhaled. For months, they'd been drowning in the noise of politics, lies, and tantrums. But now, for a few glorious minutes, 2 comedians gave them permission to laugh at the madness. Kimmel, the late-night sniper. Carrey, the artistic assassin. 2 different styles, one shared mission: to pull the mask off the most thin-skinned man in American politics. Meanwhile, Trump's digital tantrum kept unfolding. Every few minutes, a new post appeared, each one more defensive than the last. He blamed the media. He blamed the shutdown. He even blamed not being on the ballot. Anything to avoid admitting what everyone could see: the joke was on him. Because when you're the punchline, denial doesn't work. And Kimmel knew it. He strutted across that stage like a man holding the remote control of America. "If you're tired of all the losing," he joked, "don't worry, Trump's got excuses. In fact, he's got two of them. The crowd ate it up. Behind the laughter, though, was a deeper truth. Trump had spent years trying to control the narrative, twisting reality until people couldn't tell fact from fiction. But comedy? Comedy cuts through spin like sunlight through fog. That's why this moment mattered. It wasn't just jokes, it was accountability disguised as laughter. As the night went on, Kimmel doubled down. He roasted Trump's endless obsession with ratings, mocked his love of marble floors, and played old clips of Trump bragging about beautiful chandeliers and the best ballroom anywhere in the world. Then Kimmel paused, raised an eyebrow, and asked the question half of America was already thinking. Wait a minute, is he trying to sell the White House? The audience lost it. The joke was outrageous, but it hit too close to home. Trump had turned every space he touched into a product. Why not the Oval Office, too? By now, the laughter wasn't just amusement, it was a release. Every chuckle was a little rebellion against fear, frustration, and fatigue. Trump's allies rushed to defend him online, insisting he wasn't angry, that he didn't even watch. But then, of course, Trump proved them wrong by rage tweeting about the very jokes they swore he hadn't seen. You can argue with a headline, but you can't argue with a clip. And Kimmel had all the clips. Even Jim Carrey joined the aftershock, speaking in interviews about the role of art in politics, how a drawing, a skit, or a single punchline can reveal what endless debates never could. Covering for this president, Carrey said once, is like putting makeup on a melanoma, not only unsightly, but dangerous. That line alone echoed across social media. It summed up the absurdity of defending Trump's behavior while pretending it was normal. By the time the late-night shows ended, Trump's temper was still burning. His followers were trying to spin his meltdown into strength, but the damage was done. Two comedians had just dismantled his illusion of control, live on television, using nothing but jokes. And that's what terrified him most. Not the criticism, but the laughter. Because laughter spreads, it sticks, it rewires the story. And once people start laughing at you instead of with you, the game changes forever. That night wasn't just about comedy. It was about power shifting through humor. It was about truth sneaking through the cracks of a punchline. Jimmy Kimmel didn't just host a show, he staged a reckoning. And Donald Trump, for once, couldn't talk his way out of it. Donald Trump has been roasted before, but this time felt different. It wasn't a late-night jab or a random tweet. It was a full-blown public dismantling. Kimmel had set the stage. Now he was going in for the kill. The Brooklyn crowd was still laughing when he pulled out a clip, a highlight reel of Trump blaming everyone but himself for his losses. It was a masterclass in delusion. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, smirking as Trump's voice echoed through the speakers. I wasn't on the ballot, that's why they lost. The crowd burst out laughing before Kimmel even spoke. Yeah, and when you were on the ballot, they lost even harder, he quipped. Boom. The audience exploded again. Kimmel had something Trump didn't: evidence and timing. Every clip he played, every joke he dropped, landed like a jab that left a mark. This wasn't cruelty. This was poetic justice. Trump had spent years trying to control the narrative, using rage, repetition, and late-night tweets to bend reality around him. But when Kimmel fired back, it wasn't with politics, it was with laughter. And laughter, unlike spin, doesn't need fact-checking. Meanwhile, on another channel, Jim Carrey was creating his own kind of chaos. It wasn't just acting, it was art as rebellion. Carrey, who once turned rubber-faced comedy into box office gold, was now turning politics into a weapon of truth. His portrayal of Joe Biden on Saturday Night Live wasn't just imitation, it was performance therapy for a divided country. He didn't scream, he didn't lecture, he smiled, raised an eyebrow, and waited. The silence became the punchline. In those few seconds, Carrey said more about leadership than an entire press conference ever could. Alec Baldwin's Trump would rant, wave his arms, and puff his chest, while Carrey's Biden just stood there, calm, collected, watching chaos burn itself out. It was genius, it was deliberate, and it worked. America laughed, not just at the parody, but at the truth behind it, because everyone watching could feel it. This wasn't acting anymore. This was commentary disguised as comedy. Even off-screen, Carrey doubled down. He started releasing bold, angry paintings, vivid portraits that mocked corruption and power. One showed Trump melting like wax under his own spotlight. Another showed greed devouring itself. It was satire you didn't just laugh at, you felt it. And Trump, he couldn't stand it. He didn't just hate being criticized, he hated being mocked. To a man who built his empire on image, ridicule was worse than scandal. So when Carrey went on Kimmel's show later to talk about his art, it was more than a casual guest spot, it was a two-man takedown. Kimmel welcomed him with that mischievous grin, knowing exactly what the internet was about to witness. The audience cheered as Carrey sat down, holding a sketchbook filled with political cartoons that looked like they'd been drawn in fire. Kimmel flipped through them, laughing. "You've been busy," he said. "Yeah," Carrey replied. "Just doing my part to keep the mirror polished so the lies have to climb." The crowd loved it. No shouting, no insults, just truth, wrapped in humor, sharpened with art. That's what Trump couldn't fight. You can argue with a journalist, you can insult a politician, but how do you argue with laughter that's rooted in something everyone can see? Kimmel and Carrey had tapped into something that used to be rare, honest satire. Not empty mockery, but the kind that hits because it's true. By this point, Trump's anger had gone nuclear. Late-night hosts were trending more than his rallies. The jokes were cutting through faster than his press releases. Every punchline turned into a headline he couldn't control. He tried to spin it, of course, claimed he was the victim, claimed comedy was dead, claimed the FCC should take action. But that only made things worse. Because right after his complaints went public, Kimmel clapped back live on air, not with a rant, but with a smirk. "If comedy's illegal now," he said, "I'll see you all in jail tomorrow night, same time, same channel." It was that kind of humor, confident, unbothered, impossible to silence, that made Trump lose his mind. Meanwhile, clips of Kimmel's Brooklyn show were racking up millions of views. Hashtags like hashtag Vice President Maybelline and so it begins flooded social media. Trump's own words were becoming punchlines. The irony? The more he raged about it, the funnier it got. Even conservative outlets couldn't ignore it anymore. They tried to defend him, but the evidence was everywhere. Videos, transcripts, tweets, and every time they replayed the clips to criticize Kimmel, they were accidentally helping him go viral. Back in Brooklyn, Kimmel signed off his show with a grin that said, "Mission accomplished." "If you're watching this from Mar-a-Lago," he joked, "I just want to say hi, and please keep posting. We're running out of material." The audience roared one last time. And somewhere in the quiet halls of his Florida resort, a man who once ruled headlines stared at a phone screen glowing with jokes he couldn't stop. He'd spent his whole life controlling the camera, now the camera was controlling him. That's the power of ridicule. Once the laughter starts, you can't unhear it, you can't outrun it. It sticks, it echoes, it follows you. And for Trump, that echo was louder than any applause he'd ever forced. By the next morning, clips of Kimmel and Carrey's segments dominated YouTube, trending in multiple countries. News outlets picked up the story, calling it everything from a comedy coup to the roast that broke the internet. But behind the headlines was a simple truth. Two entertainers had just reminded America how powerful humor could be when it speaks truth to ego. Kimmel used words, Carrey used expression. Together, they did what no opponent, no scandal, and no fact-checker could do. They made Trump ridiculous. And in politics, that's worse than being wrong. That's being forgettable. The man who once said, "I alone can fix it," was now being fixed by punchlines. And the audience, they weren't just laughing, they were waking up. By sunrise, the internet had exploded. Clips from Kimmel's Brooklyn monologue and Jim Carrey's savage impressions were everywhere, millions of views in hours. But no one was watching more obsessively than Donald Trump himself. He was furious. And when Trump gets mad, he doesn't get quiet, he types. At 1:36 a.m., he posted another rant, claiming Time magazine had treated him unfairly. He actually wrote, "They used the worst picture of me ever." The irony was perfect. The man who bragged about fake Time covers at his golf clubs was now crying about a real one. And as always, the anger spiraled. Within hours, Trump was railing against unfunny late-night hosts, the rigged media, and radical comedians. But here's what he didn't realize. The more he raged, the more content he gave them. Every tweet was new material. Every insult was a new setup for a joke. By the time the next episode aired, Kimmel was already armed with fresh ammunition. He rolled a clip of Trump attacking him on live TV. Trump, red-faced, declared, "Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings. He's not talented. They should have fired him a long time ago." Kimmel paused the clip, then with that mischievous smile said, "You hear that, crowd, Mr. President? That's what bad ratings sound like." The audience went wild. That moment became one of the most replayed burns in late-night history. But Kimmel didn't stop at jokes. He turned Trump's obsession with ratings into a running gag, measuring everything from election losses to failed endorsements as ratings dips. Trump's campaign, Kimmel quipped, is basically the final season of a show nobody wants renewed. Each joke hit harder because it carried something real underneath. The laughs weren't cheap, they were earned. And every punchline was a mirror. Meanwhile, Jim Carrey was doing what he did best, taking absurdity and giving it art form. On SNL and in interviews, he turned Trump's chaos into living caricature. He once said, "Covering for this president is like putting makeup on a Melonia, not only unsightly, but dangerous." That line echoed across social media like a slap. Because that's what Carrey did. He made ugly truth sound poetic. And when Kimmel and Carrey's worlds overlapped, the result was explosive. On Kimmel's show, Carrey revealed that he'd started painting because words weren't enough anymore. He said, "I'm painting the lies so people can see them. You can't argue with a picture." The audience sat silent for a moment, then erupted into applause. It was satire meeting sincerity. And somewhere, Trump was watching, seething, realizing that even when he wasn't mentioned by name, everyone knew who they were talking about. Then came the FCC threat. Brendan Carr, one of the federal communications commissioners and a Trump loyalist, made an unthinkable statement. He suggested that if networks didn't handle Kimmel's attacks, the FCC might have to step in. It was censorship wrapped in a warning, something you'd expect in a dictatorship, not a democracy. Kimmel's response? Pure class, pure comedy. "Apparently, I'm now a national security threat," he said on air. "If making fun of Trump is illegal, I'll see you all in prison. Bring snacks." The crowd roared. That one line shut down the entire controversy. Even other politicians, including Republicans, criticized Carr's statement. Ted Cruz, yes, that Ted Cruz, called it mob-like behavior. That's how bad it was. When Ted Cruz calls your Trump defense too much, you know you've crossed a line. But Kimmel didn't need to defend himself with politics. He had laughter. He knew that once you make people laugh at a lie, the lie loses its power. Still, Trump's ego couldn't let it go. He doubled down, blaming Kimmel, blaming Hollywood, blaming deep state comedy. He even claimed the jokes were part of a coordinated attack. Yeah, a comedy conspiracy? It would have been funny if it wasn't so revealing. Because at that point, Trump wasn't fighting policy, he was fighting perception and losing. Every meme, every monologue, every impression chipped away at his myth of dominance. And if laughter was a weapon, he was surrounded. Meanwhile, Jim Carrey continued doing what no one else dared, using empathy as ammunition. His version of Biden wasn't just parody, it was contrast. Carrey played him calm, patient, occasionally goofy, the anti-Trump in every sense. It reminded people that leadership doesn't have to scream to be strong. In interviews, Carrey broke it down. Comedy is rhythm. Chaos hates rhythm. If you can find the rhythm, you control the chaos. That one line perfectly described what Kimmel and Carrey were doing. They weren't just telling jokes, they were conducting the chaos. And Trump couldn't stand it. His social feed turned into a meltdown museum. All caps rants, late-night reposts, and of course, endless self-praise to balance the bruised ego. He even reposted old clips of himself being cheered at rallies, as if nostalgia could cancel ridicule. But it was too late. The internet had chosen its side. The jokes had momentum. And once the internet laughs, there's no coming back. That's the part Trump never understood. You can't debate laughter. You can't sue a punchline. You can't silence a smirk. When people start laughing at you, your power doesn't just fade, it evaporates. And that's what made this late-night showdown historic. It wasn't just a comedian versus a president. It was truth versus vanity, art versus ego. And for once, laughter won. By the end of that week, every major outlet had covered it. CNN called it the roast heard round the world. Even conservative pundits admitted, off-camera, that Trump walked right into it. But the real story wasn't Trump's anger. It was what the laughter exposed. The power of comedy to strip pretense bare, to turn bluster into parody, to remind the audience that no one, not even a president, is above being the butt of a joke. Kimmel said it best near the end of that week. I talk about Trump because he's a bully, and the only thing bullies hate more than losing is being laughed at. He paused, smiled, and added, "Trust me, he's hearing the laughter." And he was. Every replay, every meme, every standing ovation. What started as a Brooklyn monologue had turned into a cultural moment, one that no tantrum could undo. The bully had finally become the punchline. By the time the storm died down, something had shifted. The night Trump tried to laugh off, the one he called fake news and unfunny television, had already carved itself into the internet's memory. Millions of people had watched Jimmy Kimmel's monologue and Jim Carrey's sharp impressions, and they weren't just laughing anymore, they were thinking. That's the secret most politicians forget. Laughter isn't just noise, it's a message. When people laugh at you, it means they've stopped fearing you. And for Donald Trump, that was the beginning of the end, not politically, but psychologically. The man who once controlled the media cycle with outrage was now being controlled by punchlines. Late-night TV, the same stage he used to dominate through phone-ins and interviews, had turned against him. The very world that once applauded him for his showmanship was now mocking the show. And the truth is, Trump didn't lose to politics. He lost to rhythm, to timing, to comedians who knew how to turn bluster into background noise. Kimmel kept doing what he did best, calmly holding up receipts. Every time Trump denied saying something, Kimmel played the clip. Every time Trump bragged about a historic win, Kimmel pulled up the numbers. And every time Trump tried to paint himself as the victim, Kimmel let the audience decide who looked like the punchline. That's what made it sting. There was no malice, no shouting, just proof, wrapped in humor. And right when Trump thought the joke cycle would fade, Jim Carrey reignited it. Carrey's art exhibitions and interviews became viral sensations. He told one interviewer, "If laughter is the sound of freedom, then we're still alive." It wasn't just a quote, it was a mission statement. His paintings went viral for their raw honesty. Trump with melting features, surrounded by dollar signs and chaos. Others showing America staring back at itself in a cracked mirror. People shared them not just as art, but as truth-telling, visual satire in a time when words felt cheap. And when Carrey talked about it, he wasn't bitter or smug. He was calm, philosophical. He said, "We're fighting the same evils people fought 100 years ago: greed, abuse of power, contempt for truth. I'm just doing it with brushes instead of speeches." It hit hard because it was real. While politicians shouted on cable news, artists and comedians were reaching more people by simply telling the truth creatively. That's why this story isn't really about Donald Trump losing his temper. It's about how laughter survived manipulation. In a world where outrage is used to sell lies, humor became a form of defense. Kimmel and Carrey didn't just make fun of Trump, they diffused him. They took his bluster, his endless self-promotion, his false confidence, and turned it inside out. And the audience didn't just laugh, they saw. That's what terrified Trump the most, because deep down, he's always understood the power of television. He knows what happens when the camera loves you, and what happens when it doesn't. And suddenly, that same camera was no longer his ally. It wasn't following him, it was watching him. Every gesture, every rant, every rage post, all of it became material. Kimmel turned every tantrum into a new monologue. Carrey turned every scandal into a new painting. And together, they built something no politician could spin: a cultural mirror. By now, even Trump's supporters were split. Some laughed quietly, others pretended not to care, but everyone saw the same truth. The man who once mocked everyone else had finally become the main act of his own roast. And that's why comedy still matters. Because when laughter is honest, it doesn't just entertain, it exposes. Kimmel summed it up perfectly one night after another round of Trump attacks. "You can say I go too hard on him. Maybe I do. But here's the thing: bullies hate laughter. And Trump? He's the biggest bully I've ever seen." The crowd clapped, not wildly, not out of habit, but because it was true. For decades, Trump had built an empire on image. He turned attention into oxygen. But that night, Kimmel and Carrey flipped the formula. They showed that attention without respect is humiliation. And once that curtain falls, it never rises the same way again. From that moment on, every time Trump ranted about ratings or fake news or late-night losers, people didn't take him seriously anymore. They imagined the jokes. The spell had broken. The myth of untouchable power had been replaced with punchlines. And that's what great satire does. It outlasts the moment. Because years from now, people might forget the speeches and the scandals, but they'll remember the laughter. They'll remember Kimmel's calm grin and Carrey's knowing smile. They'll remember how two comedians turned a tantrum into truth. Even now, the clips keep circulating. Millions of replays, countless remixes, the same message echoing louder each time. Ego can't survive humor. Trump still tries, of course. He'll still post, still rage, still insist he's the victim of unfair jokes. But the thing about laughter is, once it's out there, you can't put it back. It's in the air, it's in the memory, and no tweet can erase it. So when people look back on this bizarre chapter in American culture, when politics became entertainment and truth became a punchline, they'll remember how comedy fought back. Not with hate, not with shouting, but with timing, truth, and a little bit of Brooklyn bravado. Because sometimes the loudest way to expose a lie is to laugh at it until it breaks. Kimmel knew it, Carrey embodied it, and Trump, well, he proved it. So the next time someone asks, does laughter still matter? Remember that night. Remember the roar of the crowd. Remember the hashtags, the sketches, the meltdown that launched 1,000 memes. Because laughter didn't just survive, it won. And Donald Trump, he was the punchline that taught America the difference between being famous and being funny.